Good afternoon, and welcome to the Oregon Newspaper Publishers Association's gubernatorial debate here in wonderful Welches, Oregon. I'm Mark Garber, and I'm president of the Pampa Media Group and also a past president of the Oregon Newspaper Publishers Association, and I'll be moderating the debate today. For many decades, this ONPA event has been the unofficial kickoff to the gubernatorial season in Oregon. And this year we have a particularly exciting race for governor, as we have no incumbent governor running, and we have three very well-known candidates on the stage here today. This event is being live streamed on numerous newspaper websites across Oregon, and I want to thank our partner, Allied Video Productions, for helping make the live stream possible. After a few brief introductions and a reminder of the ground rules, we're going to get directly to the debate. Other than during these introductions, we want the audience to remain quiet during the entirety of the debate, and that would include no beeping noises from your cell phones, please, so make sure that they're silenced. Thank you. But for now, we do want to give a warm newspaper industry welcome to the three candidates we've invited to appear here today. And moving in alphabetical order, we have former state representative and House Minority Leader Christine Drazen, who is a Republican nominee for governor. Welcome, Representative Drazen. Next, we have, if I'm not in order of how they're sitting, but in alphabetical order, former State Senator Betsy Johnson, who is running as a non-affiliated candidate for governor. Please welcome Senator Johnson. And finally, we have former Oregon House Speaker Tina Kotek, who is the Democratic nominee for governor. Please welcome Speaker Kotek. We also want to thank the four journalists that we have here today who have helped to plan this debate and who has taken the time to be here to ask questions. We have journalists from different parts of the state who will bring their own perspectives to this, and they are Danielle Jester, Managing Editor and General Manager of the Lake County Examiner in Southeastern Oregon, Laura Gunderson, who's the Managing Editor of News for the Oregonian, Oregon Live, Andrew Cutler, Publisher and Editor of the Pendleton East Oregonian and LeGrand Observer, and Mark Miller, who is Editor of Pampa Media Group's newspapers in Washington and Columbia counties. Let's say thanks to all of them. So we're just about ready to start. I do need to briefly remind everyone about today's guidelines. We conducted a drawing beforehand to determine the order for opening and closing remarks. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to open and 3 minutes to close. Each of our panelists here will ask 2 questions, and for those, each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond. An ONPA timer, Lori, will signal at with 30 seconds to go with the yellow card, and then the red card will go up at the end of the allotted time. And unfortunately, if you go over, I'll let you complete a sentence, but if you go over past your allotted time, I'll have to interrupt you. Sorry about that. We also will rotate the questions among the candidates so everyone gets a fair shot at being first to answer a question. Our journalists on the panel have the option of asking follow-up questions, and the response to the follow-up questions will be limited to 60 seconds. And at their discretion, the journalist may use a follow-up question to ask a candidate to respond directly to criticism from another candidate. Not that that's going to happen, right? But they have that option to follow up. And the responses to those follow-up questions as well will be limited to 60 seconds. Prior to the debate, each candidate drew the name of another candidate, and we'll have the opportunity to ask that candidate a question after the panelist questions have been completed. Responses to those questions will be limited to 90 seconds. And you're all aware of who you get to ask a question, right? Okay, so let's get this debate started with opening statements. Based on the drawing, Representative Drazen will go first.
Thank you, and thank you all for this opportunity today. It does feel like the official kickoff of the general election campaign, and I'm honored to be here. My name is Christine Drazen, and I am originally from Klamath Falls. I start all of my introductions that way. And the reason for me is that is a really important piece of how you'll get to know me and my leadership and how I arrived at my approach to public policy making. As a kid growing up in Klamath Falls, my family was less stable than they would have liked when we were growing up. And the reason was the economy down there suffered based on the fact that most of that economy was dependent on natural resources. And over time, that shifted. The ability to actually sustain rural communities in that particular sector has shifted over time. And it also meant that for my family in particular, they did talk a lot about politics. They mostly thought that politicians were no good and rotten, and that they didn't see the problems that they created for real people, and that they left people behind. And they talked that way about politicians, and they made this connection for me personally between the lives that we were living and whether or not they could put food on the table, or whether or not we had to move to a cheaper place, and whether or not my dad could find a job, whether or not the folks in our community could find a job. And so I was raised with that mindset, that understanding that our civic life matters, that politics matters. I went and put myself through George Fox College, and after college, made the decision to find out for myself if what they thought was true, that our political life had lost faith with the people of Oregon. And I went to work inside the state capitol as a staff person. At that time, we had Republican majorities in the House and the Senate. And John Kitzhaber had just started his term as governor of the state of Oregon. So we had a Democrat in the center and Republicans managing the legislative process. I rose up through the ranks to eventually be chief of staff to the majority leader, and then, of course, chief of staff to the Speaker of the House. It gave me a front row seat to negotiations, bipartisanship, compromise, blow-ups, you name it. I had the opportunity to see for myself exactly how that process worked. And I can tell you, I learned a few things. The first of which is that I stand with my parents' assessment, that sometimes politicians that are elected to serve don't help the people. That's what we're experiencing right now in Oregon. I'm running for governor because I believe with single-party control that politicians have lost sight of serving everyday Oregonians. And this year is about making a change. This year is about making the decision to find balance again in our political life. And that this year we can, in fact, choose to improve the future of Oregonians and strengthen our state moving forward. Thank you.
Speaker Kotek.
Thank you. First off, I want to thank the Oregon Newspaper Publishers Association for having us here today for this debate. My name is Tina Kotek. I began my public service at Oregon Food Bank, working to eliminate hunger and its root causes. I then moved on to be an advocate for children, served as a state legislator in a diverse community of many neighborhoods and many small businesses, and over the last 9 years as the Speaker of the Oregon House. And I'm honored today to be the Democratic Party nominee for our next governor. As a leader, I've always been focused in my public service of measuring my success on the positive impact that I've had on people's lives in our state. You know, right now we're in unusual economic times. We're seeing very high gas prices, prices for groceries, prices for healthcare, costs going up for everyday Oregonians. And I think what it's important to remember is that what I've heard, that families are worried about making ends meet. Our parents are worried about sending their kids to school. And folks in our neighborhoods are feeling very unsafe. They're worried about being able to walk in their neighborhoods. And I believe all Oregonians, in one form or another, are worried about the addiction crisis that is gripping our state. I do this work because I believe in getting things done. I believe in getting results and bringing people together to solve problems. My track record as an advocate is very clear. I know how to get results. I have fought for frontline workers to have what they need, to increase the minimum wage, to make sure workers have paid sick leave and paid family leave. I delivered on new education funding so our schools could have the resources they need to improve our graduation rates, fund early childhood education, and fully fund career and technical education, which was the promise and what voters wanted us to do when they passed Measure 98. And when Donald Trump sought to outlaw abortion in our state, or in the nation, I made sure we were prepared for that in passing the strongest reproductive rights law in the country. And honestly, I've been sounding the alarm for years about the crisis around housing and doing everything I could as Speaker of the House to make new investments in affordable housing and make sure that we could keep Oregon renters from being evicted and making sure we had new options of types of housing to be built in our communities. Because let's be very clear with ourselves, these are very major challenges that we are facing here in our state. And no matter what the other candidates say here today, there are no quick fixes, there are no miracle cures to take on these large challenges. Only hard work is going to allow us to ensure that every part of our state can thrive. And so Oregon and Oregonians deserve a strong, effective leader who can get the work done and deliver results. And that's why I'm running for governor, to make sure we can bring people together, listen to each other's concerns, craft those solutions, and get them across the finish line. And I would be honored to have your support for governor. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker Kotek. Senator Johnson?
Thank you. I'm running for governor because I believe we're losing the Oregon that we love. Rising crime and violence, a homeless crisis, schools failing way too many of our kids, soaring cost of living, a housing supply and affordability crisis, and well-fed federal government failing to show up when Oregonians need them. If there was ever a clarion call for real change, it's right now. Oregonians are distrustful of the radical right, and they are terrified of the progressive left. There is a thirst for common sense change. What could be more different and impactful than a governor with an allegiance only to Oregonians and not to a party agenda or special interests? Oregonians want their Oregon back, and I believe that we can get there. But we're not going to do it without big, bold change in our politics and our leadership. I don't think that's either Tina or Christine, who are stuck with the agenda and the vested interests that brought them here. The same old political extremes that got us into this mess, if elected, will only make things worse. I'm not running as a Democrat or a Republican. I'm running as an Oregonian. And the tens of thousands of people who have signed petitions to put me on the November ballot know that my loyalty resides with them, not with any political party or special interest. As governor, I will lead with the best ideas from both parties and demand bipartisan support for legislation, for budgets, and for appointments. No longer will one party run roughshod over the other. Diverse voices will have a place at the table, be listened to and heard, no matter what their politics, no matter what their zip code. The choice is very clear. You have leaders of the Republican Party in Oregon and the Democratic Party in Oregon right here on the stage today. I believe they've driven us into the ditch that we now find ourselves in, and I'm here to pull us out. Christine wants to be the first anti-choice governor in Oregon's history, promising to veto pro-choice policies. Tina wants to preserve tent cities and bring the culture wars to your kids' classroom. She'd have us all woke and broke. While these two keep fighting, I'm going to reject the political extremes and lead Oregon towards common ground. But to do that, we need to recapture the maverick spirit, break free from the straitjacket of extremism and party politics. We need to put the people back in charge. Thank you.
Thanks for those opening remarks and for sticking closely to the allotted time. We're now going to move to questions from our panel. And the first will come from Danielle Jester of the Lake County Examiner.
Speaker Kotek, Senator Johnson, Representative Drazen, thank you very much for taking our questions today. The timber industry's decline has taken a toll on the economies of many rural Oregon counties in recent decades, especially with the closure of mills, which previously accounted for a significant number of jobs in outlying communities. What steps would you take to help rural Oregon better capitalize on its timber resources?
And the first question to rotate the order goes to Speaker Kotek.
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Danielle, for the question. I believe, and one of the reasons that I feel strongly about this is when all parts of our state are successful, then we're all successful no matter where you live. And certainly with the changes in the timber industry and natural resource economies over the last quite a few decades, it has been challenging for rural Oregon. As a governor, I want to make sure that I work directly with communities to try to figure out how best we move forward in a changing landscape when it comes to natural resources. One of the things that's important to me to support our timber industry in Oregon is to make sure we're utilizing products for other purposes. And one of the things that I supported as Speaker of the House was making sure we could utilize mass timber products to make new homes, so we could build new homes, particularly right away in communities that were impacted by the Labor Day wildfires. That's a project I supported in my home district at the Port of Portland, trying to leverage both state and federal dollars to do that. That kind of targeted work to make sure we can use and utilize products from Oregon for purposes for all Oregonians, I think is a good place to start. And my commitment to Oregonians in all parts of the state is to listen and to learn and to work collaboratively to solve these problems.
And it would go next to Representative Drazen.
Thank you. This is my story. When I was growing up, my dad worked in a veneer plant, disappeared, went away. And what we're talking about right now is when political winds shift and that industry is no longer favored, then it's okay to allow those entire regions and entire areas to just struggle and figure out what comes next. Nobody backfilled that and decided we're going to come in and we're going to build new infrastructure and we're going to help support an alternative. Instead, they just walked away. And we're grateful and thankful when, the tech industry rose up in its place in Oregon. The reality is, if we want to have a united Oregon, which I do, I'm committed to serving and supporting all Oregonians, regardless of political party, regardless of geography, then what we have to recognize is that natural resources have to be a part of that equation, particularly the timber industry. It shouldn't just be a part of our past. It has to be a part of our present and our future. With the housing markets that we are under, with the need to continue to provide housing, we have to look at these products as a critical piece of how we move forward as a state. And I will do everything that I can to increase the production that can occur within mills, to increase the amount of timber that we can harvest. We know what our wildfire seasons have looked like, and the reality for Oregonians on the ground is that you can manage those forests faithfully or you can watch it burn. And I believe that the better choice is to support rural Oregonians and to support our state as a whole and actively manage those forests.
Thank you very much. This is why I was in Elgin, Oregon 2 weeks ago. I went over to stand with the men and women who work at the Elgin veneer plant, a Boise Cascade plant. What I can do as governor is to make sure that the regulatory agencies treat those remaining timber companies with respect and help them comply with the law, not try to put them out of business. I was involved in trying to get DEQ to not shut that mill down, and the 230 jobs, direct mill jobs, plus all of the ancillary workers and suppliers, vendors that work around that mill. DEQ was hell-bent on closing that mill, and we managed to get that stopped. I was actively involved in that. The second thing, and I agree with my colleague, Ms. Drazen, is the value added. I was down at the Ferris Mill watching the products that were being turned out that will build the new roof at PDX. My grandmother used to butcher pigs, and she said we used everything but the oink. I came up in the timber business, and it used to be that there were teepee burners that burned the slash. We don't do that anymore. We make value-added products, and the last thing I would add is the most important thing we can do is to manage our forests, not let the place burn down every year. That contributes to global warming. It contributes to carbon emissions. We have got to manage our forests and work in conjunction with our federal partners to make sure that they manage their forests effectively. We need to put the fires out, then we need to get an opportunity to fully manage by thinning, prescriptive burning, managing our trees so that we don't have conflagration every year.
Thank you. The next question will come from Laura Gunderson of the Oregonian and Oregon Live. And you can, I got a little out of order there, so direct this one to Speaker Kotek, and I'll get back on. Speaker Kotek, Senator Johnson, Representative Drazen, and we'll get back on track.
You're in charge.
Okay.
Speaker Kotek. We regularly hear from readers who feel homelessness across Oregon has reached a level of humanitarian crisis. While this is a complicated issue, typically addressed at the local level, what specifically would you do to address homelessness as governor?
Thank you for the question, Laura. Our crisis of people living on the streets and in RVs and in tents across our communities, across our state, is a humanitarian crisis. I'm the only person on this stage who's been working hard over the last 5 years to make sure, as a legislator, that I could do what I can. It is really important that none of our neighbors are sleeping on the street. I have a 5-point plan on my website that specifically starts off by talking about the urgency of helping people move from the streets into permanent housing. And the key to that is to make sure we have more organized street response teams that can work with people, develop those relationships, help them move from a tent into shelter and into permanency. But you have to have a place for those folks to be connected to, and that is shelter. And that is why I supported Project Turnkey when I was Speaker of the House, a project that has been incredibly effective. At the beginning of the pandemic, we had motels and hotels that weren't being used. And we said, let's buy them, let's work with community groups, let's turn them into transitional shelters. And we did. In less than 7 months, we increased shelter capacity in the state by more than 20%, creating more than 850 units across the state. That type of concrete innovation is what we need to do in urgency. And I will say that my two opponents, neither of them like that project. And it's working in communities, and that's the type of work I will bring an urgency to solving our homeless crisis in every part of our state.
Senator Johnson?
Thank you. I would like to reject the notion that Tina's the only one working on homelessness. I'm part of a group that has helped repurpose the abandoned Wapato jail, built at a cost of $65 million and never used. I've been part of a group that has reanimated that building and turned it into a place of recovery, re-entry into society. It is now a place of healing and hope. I would also point out that my concern about Project Turnkey related to its sustainability. These motels are being turned over to not-for-profits, and I voted for it, but I never saw a clear path that when the state money ran out, that there would be an opportunity to continue to fund those facilities. Our homeless crisis is an absolute crisis, and I am very concerned that when Tina asserts that she has been a leader in trying to solve the homelessness issue, we now have tent cities all over Portland, and I would ask her, what's gotten better during your period of time over the last 9 years while you've been Speaker that has alleviated this? We have pitched more tents than we have pulled permits, I would submit, for housing. So this is a humanitarian crisis, and we must never lose track of the fact that it is inexorably tied to the problem of drugs and mental illness in our streets. Tina actually passed a bill that makes it harder to move people off of the streets. We all talk about homelessness, but we have not infused a sense of urgency about it. As governor, I would convene public safety, social service experts, mental health experts. Stop operating in these silos that have us fighting against each other about the best methodology to end homelessness. Do something about it.
Okay. Representative Drazen.
Thank you. This is going to be the theme, I guess, of the answer to this particular question. And I think what we're all going to establish is that we all care deeply about resolving this problem. In my freshman term as a legislator in Salem, I was hyper-focused on homeless response for youth. I represented a rural community out in Clackamas County and was stunned and amazed to hear how many youth in my district were homeless. couch surfing, sleeping in their cars, and still trying to go to school, well before the COVID impacts. And I supported and passed legislation which created supports for those students called Second Home through Ecumenical Ministries that matches up homeless youth with members of the community who have a spare bedroom. They're vetted, it's a safe place. More than 90% of those students graduate high school through that program. I then worked with the House Majority Leader to expand that program and to invest deeper and more thoroughly in that program and then wraparound services specifically for homeless youth. I've been deeply engaged and invested on this issue a long time, and I want to say this. If we're going to resolve this challenge, it cannot be partisan politics, because what we need is both compassion and accountability. What we have been experiencing in Oregon right now has enabled this problem to spiral out of control. And it will only get better if Oregonians themselves and the people who are leading in local governments on a state level are willing to look at these challenges on a person-by-person basis and say that homelessness must be rare and temporary, not permanent and chronic. We can solve this challenge together, but we have got to stop looking at it like it's an anonymous issue and it's a political football. It should not be.
Thank you. Laura, did you have a follow-up or anything right now?
I do, thank you. Senator Johnson, I heard you say that you would like to convene groups to talk about the issue, but I also heard you say that you supported the Wapato project. So I'm curious if you see the solution there as more facilities like Wapato, or do you think that the groups you would come together would come up with a different idea?
I'm going to answer that in two ways. More like Wapato would be a good thing, and I know that Bend is looking at perhaps following the Wapato model. We have gotten too interested in fighting about which model works best. Do you shelter first and then try to find and solve the underlying problem? Do you identify the underlying problem and then shelter? So by convening people, I'm saying there's not one model. I'm saying Wapato is working. We have a demonstrated track record of success in the other Helping Hands facilities. So it's not just one model, and we've got to stop fighting about what's the best model. Convening people in Portland, there's not going to be a single model, but we need to begin working together and stop fighting each other for funding and for whose model is the best. But yes, I think Wapato could be, whether it's a repurposed jail in Bend, it is, or whether it's other repurposed buildings, I think that Wapato model could work, but it is based on accountability and personal responsibility. If people drink or use drugs in that facility, they're kicked out and they have to contribute to their own room and board by working.
Thank you. Would either of the other candidates like to respond to the follow-up?
Yes, I would, only to say to Senator Johnson that I was glad that my piece of legislation that streamlined permitting for shelters actually helped get the project at Wapato off the ground, and that's something we worked on together. Look, I agree with both of my colleagues here. This is complex, and there is not one single way to solve it. You need to do all of it. You need to help people. It's a personal issue on the ground, making sure people who are hurting right now have the services they need. They can move into a place with a locked door and then get into permanent housing. And we need more housing. Nothing is more frustrating than an outreach worker talking to someone and saying, I'm here to help you, and then I have nowhere to place you for housing. We need more housing. We need more mental health and addiction services. And frankly, what we're doing right now is unacceptable. We are not delivering for Oregonians. And it's one of the issues I decided to run, because one of the things I learned at Oregon Food Bank is the only way you get stable, the only way you have self-sufficiency is to be able to have a roof over your head.
Thank you. Representative Drazen.
Yeah, I will briefly respond to this. I think it's very important to recognize that we have invested somewhere between $1.5 billion and $2 billion in services somewhere adjacent to or directly directed to homelessness over the course of the COVID period. And a focus that has been almost exclusively on housing has not resolved the challenges on our streets. That has to be a part of the problem. It is not the sum total of the solution here. You know, when you talk about Project Turnkey in particular, the reasons that those hotels and motels were underused was COVID shutdowns. And then they became in this position where they were no longer a viable revenue source. In my particular community, they wanted to purchase the only hotel in my rural district out in Estacada and do an out-of-sight, out-of-mind approach to the homeless in Portland. Ship them out in the middle of nowhere and the problem is solved. That is not a solution. This has got to be something that's community-based, community-focused, and it needs to be solutions on the ground in the communities that are experiencing them the most. It cannot be shuffled around to other parts of the state. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question will come from Andrew Cutler of the Pendleton East Oregonian and La Grande Observer, and the order will be Senator Johnson, Representative Drazen, and Speaker Kotek.
Okay. So the Greater Idaho Movement speaks to the urban-rural divide in Oregon. Why do you think residents are so unhappy with Oregon they are voting to move to Idaho, and how can you address those concerns?
Well, let me start by saying when 8 counties actually vote and a total of 13 are looking to abandon our beloved Oregon, that is a clarion call for government to do something about it. The governor, I think, has been somewhat sanguine about the fact that those counties want to leave. I believe that the difference between urban Portland and the rest of the state is not just based on geography. People that feel disrespected, disenfranchised, not part of the system are really pissed off. They are angry. And that's one of the reasons for my candidacy for governor. I want to give voice to those people who have felt disrespected and shut out, and that Salem has told them what to do and how to run their lives. I am a governor, or will be a governor, that knows that there is Oregon east of Bend and that there is Oregon south of Eugene. And having visited those communities, I can tell you how genuinely mad they are. I think that the governor needs to be cautious about urban solutions being dictated to rural Oregon, and that we need to pay serious attention. The governor needs to know what are the economies of those regions, whether you're making potato chips, wood chips, silicon chips, Fisher chips. The governor needs to be involved in economic development and make sure that those regional differences are recognized and they're brought along fully in decision making, and that they're brought along fully in economic opportunity. Imagine a governor who would not sign a bill or sign legislation or make appointments to boards and commissions without bipartisan support. That's the governor I'm going to be as a non-affiliated governor.
Thank you. Representative Drazen.
We have for far too long had single-party control in Oregon. My colleagues on the stage with me today have been Democrats in control of Salem for 15 to 20 years. And we did not get here overnight. This rural-urban divide that we're experiencing is one that took time to develop. The people who are living in the parts of the state that want to leave and go to Idaho, their concerns and their issues are real. They deserve respect. They deserve local control. They cannot continue to live under an oppressive, frankly condescending expectation that if it works in Portland or if it works on the I-5 corridor, that they must live underneath those rules. It goes from a response to climate, it goes to a response to our economic activity, as well as labor, and I could go on, housing, you name it. That part of the state is not respected enough to have their voices heard. They'll drive 6 hours each way to get all the way to Salem to make 3-minute comments, to be patted on the head, have nothing change in that legislation, and drive home. That's why they want to go to Idaho. There is a lack of understanding from Salem about what it really means to live in the rural parts of the state. And a lot of the proposals that are rammed down their throats are not workable, they're not welcome, and nobody in Salem has been accommodating enough to recognize we need to be a unified Oregon.
Thanks. Speaker Kotek.
Thank you for the question, Andrew. We definitely have divide in our state. In fact, the entire country. We have large swaths of our state where people feel left behind and not listened to. And it's very important for the next governor to be a listener who spends a lot of time outside of Salem. I had the great pleasure when I worked at Oregon Food Bank and Children First for Oregon, traveling the state and listening to folks in their communities about their issues. In fact, I worked on a study that said the types of policies that come out of the state from Salem don't always help rural Oregonians. For example, asking them to go, do certain things under certain programs when, wasn't possible in these communities. That's something I learned early on, that when you do public policy, it's going to have different impact in different parts of the state. When I was Speaker of the House, when we raised the minimum wage, I knew it would have a different impact in Eastern Oregon along the Idaho border. So I went out and visited. And I worked with then State Representative Cliff Bentz to figure out how we could to work on that issue. And what we came up with was something called the Eastern Oregon Border Zone, a zone right on the border with Idaho where we could have some different rules of the game, some resources, ways to help that part of our state be competitive with Southwest Idaho. I definitely want, and I have heard the concerns that are coming out of the Greater Idaho movement. Look forward to sitting down and talking about those issues. But at the end of the day, I hope we can come together as Oregonians and work on issues that at the end are not partisan issues: housing, mental health issues, good schools, so we can have the communities we all want to have. And I think we can do that as one Oregon.
Thank you. The next question will come from Mark Miller with the Pampa
Mr.
Media
Moderator,
Group.
do we get any opportunity to respond to colleagues?
I'll allow you, each of you 30 seconds.
I'd just like to point out that on Tina's website today is something that is exacerbating, not website, but social media, exacerbating the urban-rural divide. She is suggesting that because someone was at one of my rallies with a Confederate flag, that rural Oregonians are racist and that you have to be racist to support my campaign. That is anything but the truth. That exacerbates the divide. I condemn racism, discrimination, and bigotry in any form, and somehow to imply that racists are attending my event just drives home the point that urban Oregon doesn't understand rural Oregon.
Okay. Speaker Kotek.
I'm glad Senator Johnson reads our press releases. I'm not saying that people that attend your rallies are racist. I'm saying that when images like the Confederate flag are in public spaces, it keeps some and many Oregonians from wanting to feel included in that conversation. And I'm glad to hear that you would say that well, we'll talk about it later. But the issue there is making sure that when people go to work with people running for office, that they feel included. And a Confederate flag in communities is seen as a racist symbol, and it is not inclusive.
Representative Drazen, do you want to jump into this? Okay. Okay. Thank you. And we have a little bit of flexibility for some back and forth, so choose your shots well, I guess. Okay. Mark, you didn't get to ask your question yet, did you? So the order, Mark, is Representative Drazen, Speaker Kotek, Senator Johnson.
Representative, you've probably noticed that it's hot this week in Oregon. I think we've all noticed. Scientists say that extreme weather events, including ice storms in the winter, monsoon-style rainstorms in the spring, and heat waves like this in the summer are only becoming more common and more extreme. And we know that Oregon's not immune to that. At the same time, Oregonians have been facing some of the highest prices at the pump in the country this summer, and the state's power consumption has increased significantly over the past decade. As governor, what would you do to address climate change while also making sure that we're addressing Oregonians' energy needs?
Yeah, thank you for this question. Climate continues to have an impact on our everyday lives. We have felt that with multiple years of drought in Oregon. And this is an important issue. So there are a couple of things that I think are important to state on this one. Oregon continues to be a leader on climate. We have some of the cleanest energy sources in the nation. We have completely transitioned off of coal. We have hydropower, solar, wind. All of these things exist within our state. The challenge that we're going to have, and that the next governor will have, is how to protect access to reliable, affordable energy, whether or not it's at the gas pump, which we can do something about that with gas taxes and some of the regulatory environment, some of the issues that we face when it comes to our energy, but also in protecting our dams. Right now there's a conversation going on between governors and stakeholders about whether or not to remove dams. Now, I want to be clear on this point in particular. We need to continue to protect access to no carbon hydropower. So we're not talking low carbon, we're talking no carbon emission hydropower, and it needs to continue to be a part of our mix here in the state of Oregon. So I would continue to support the programs that we have related to climate action, and I would tear up the governor's executive order on climate, which she chose to adopt after cap and trade, California-style cap and trade did not move through the legislative process. If that would have passed, we would see $3 more at a minimum at the gas pump today. We would see 30% higher costs to heat and cool your home today. That was the wrong concept. It was the wrong idea.
Thank you. Okay, next in order is Speaker Kotek.
Thank you for the question, Mark. Climate change is real. Oregonians are feeling it, and it is a top priority for Oregon voters this fall. As someone who believes, as a woman of faith, that we have to take care of this world that we've been given, We have a lot of work to do. And in addition to trying to keep the problem from getting worse, we have to mitigate the issues and help our communities be resilient, because there are droughts and wildfires and adverse weather effects that are killing people. So we have to do both. We have to keep our communities safe and address climate change. I worked hard last year to pass 100% clean electricity by 2040. It is going to take oversight to make sure we can move to offshore wind and more storage and maintaining hydro, all the things that will get us to the clean electricity standard by 2040. And it's going to take work. It's a transition, and we're all going to have to work hard. One of the things that I did support as Speaker of the House was a change at the Public Utility Commission. So the Public Utility Commission could take into account rates and how they would affect low-income Oregonians, low-income ratepayers. I'm not sure if my colleagues voted for that, but I certainly did, because in this transition, we have to protect our most vulnerable Oregonians, our most vulnerable communities, and still make the transition. And when it comes to the executive orders, those executive orders were put in place because Leader Drazen led a Republican walkout for us to take a market-driven approach to address carbon emissions in our state. Those executive orders are reasonably moving us forward while also protecting our communities, and they should stay in place.
Climate change is real, and Oregon has to do its share to lower our carbon footprint. But I reject the premise that the progressive bills that were brought forward, that the economic burden should fall on hardworking Oregonians. It is not the responsibility of the blue-collar guys that I used to represent in the Senate to pay for how expensive the progressive agenda is to moderate climate change. I think that the biggest thing we can do to mitigate climate change is what I've already spoken to, and that's not let the place burn down every year. The amount of particulate and carbon that goes into the air from conflagration is absolutely unacceptable. We need to manage our forests and recognize that that's a place where carbon is sequestered, that they help cool the environment. We have to manage our forests better. The other thing that we need to be conscious of is in implementing alternate energy sources. The speaker just talked about offshore wind. I want to make sure that that offshore wind doesn't come at the expense of fishermen. I want us to keep our damn hands off the dams. I agree with Christine that clean, non-carbon hydropower is a boon to us, and to take out those dams would cost an enormous amount of money. The executive orders, I believe, are a complete usurpation of the legislative process. What the governor could not get through the people's branch of government, the legislature, she imposed through executive order. The rule writing has been excessive, and I think the outcome will be much higher prices for Oregonians struggling with inflation.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. So now we're back to the start of the panel. Everyone got a shot at that, right?
I'm going to respond, actually, to Senator Kotek briefly.
Okay.
Thank you. I just want to say this very briefly about the need for checks and balances in Salem. The cap-and-trade proposal that Senator Johnson just referenced absolutely pushed all of the costs, all of the harm, all of the pressure to respond to climate onto everyday working Oregonians. And when we were just talking about the rural-urban divide, people that drive further would face a higher burden for this. The need to lead a Republican effort to deny quorum on this was simply because of the intensity of single-party majority control, their determination that no matter what this bill did to anybody, they were going to pass it no matter what. The need to stand in the gap was essential and critical, and we used that tool because we had no other options after making 100 amendment proposals that were rejected by the single-party control.
Hang on one second. Mark, do you want to rephrase for a follow-up question and give them each another 60 seconds? Ask them specifically about what they're talking about now. We could give them each 60 seconds if you want to talk about this a little bit more.
Sure. 60 seconds on a cap-and-trade proposal, what is that something that candidates here could find a way to support a cap-and-trade program?
Yes.
That's bipartisan.
Go.
Thank you. So the question about whether or not the cap-and-trade proposal, which was bipartisan, could have received Republican support, the answer to that could have been yes. The proposals that came out of the members of that committee that worked very hard to come to compromise on that, all of them were rejected and not supported. And the legislation got more and more onerous. And frankly, it became more and more an an issue that was kicked off to rulemaking, which created less certainty about what the costs would have been, frankly, what the revenues would have raised, and what the increase in growth of government would have been. In the end, it was an absolute monstrosity of a bill, but there was an opportunity for compromise there.
Senator Johnson, 60 more, and then Speaker Kotek.
Thank you. I would agree with the premise that there was not a lot of flexibility in offering amendments to that bill. But I would like to point out that while Christine was in Reno poolside, I was on the Senate floor standing up to my party fighting that bill. It's a lot harder to be in the building fighting for a good outcome than it is to flee the building. That bill was a monstrosity at the end, and it would have crippled rural economies and hurt working people substantially.
Speaker Kotek.
So first I'm going to start with the positive that my opponents believe in climate change and know that we need to do something. What I'm not hearing is solutions. What I'm hearing is, no, that was terrible. No, we can't do that. No, that doesn't work. There must be solutions on the table. And as someone who sat in rooms, particularly with Leader Drazen, no solutions were laid on the table. It's just we don't like it. And when you have a challenge as big as climate change, and you've gone through a 2-year process to develop a piece of legislation that is market-driven and would benefit many parts, particularly rural parts of our state, to be part of the transition to renewable energy, and to have that fail, that was just saying to Oregonians, I'm going to throw in the towel, even know how big the deal is. And that was wrong. Climate change is real, and we need to have solutions, and I'm the only one up here who's going to make that happen.
Okay, we're going to, you three will get a chance to ask each other questions after the panel's questions have been exhausted. So that may be a topic you want to continue to discuss. Let's move back to Danielle Jester of Lake County Examiner. And your question will go to Speaker Kotek, and followed by Senator Johnson and Representative Drazen.
Taking care of the mental health needs of Oregon residents has been an ongoing challenge for the state. Some Oregonians most in need of mental health services have the hardest time accessing them, especially the homeless and those without health coverage. How would you improve outreach and service access for those residents to ensure they are getting the help they need?
Thank you for that question. We all know, I would be surprised if any of us in this room and those watching don't know someone who's dealing with a mental health issue or an addiction issue, particularly after 2 years of being in a global pandemic. We can't forget that these are human beings. These are our neighbors who need help. And we are living in a state where we are at the bottom of the list of providing services to folks who need them. In the Oregon I want to see, when you are ready for help, are asking for help, you can find that help and you can afford that help. And it's for whether you live on the streets or you have high-class insurance, it is very difficult to get care right now. One of the priorities for me as governor is to make sure when voters say they want something to happen, it has to happen. We passed Measure 110 that said we're going to take revenue from our marijuana industry, our cannabis industry, and put it into treatment and recovery. The Oregon Health Authority has failed to move that money. There is more money in the system, potentially in the system now, than I've ever seen. But people aren't getting the help they need. It'll be one of my top priorities as governor. My wife is a social worker. We talk about this a lot. We know that Oregonians aren't getting the help they need. It's a workforce issue. It's a management issue. It's a funding issue. At the end of the day, it's a compassion issue. And we have to make sure that people have the treatment wherever they live in this state. And I think we can make that happen.
Thank you. Senator Johnson.
Thank you. I believe this problem started way back when people left institutions with the promise that they would get mental health care in their communities, and the state was a faithless partner in making sure that that service was there. I agree with Tina in that we need to have a deeper reservoir of services, but when one gets out into rural places, the paucity of housing just exacerbates the fact that we can't get professionals to come there. We do not have the infrastructure to support mentally ill people in rural places. I would come back and touch on Ballot Measure 110 for just a moment. Ballot Measure 110 functionally legalized drugs in this state, and for anybody to lose track of the fact that there's a nexus between mental and behavioral health problems and drugs must be living in a parallel universe. We have become so lackadaisical about drugs in this state that we are accelerating what I think is a mental health crisis. Tina is right to point out that we are 50th in the provision of mental health services. The state needs to step up and fund services in rural places. We need to make sure that there's adequate housing for workforce. There may have to be incentives to draw workforce to rural places, but it is a disaster. And we all as Oregonians should be ashamed of the fact that our fabric of mental health services is as frayed as it is. We must do something about this, and we need, again, to measure what mental health damage we've done to our kids through 2 years of forced isolation away from their academic, their social, and their collegial peers in school.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. Representative Drazen.
I am a mom of 3. And I can tell you that the impacts on the COVID shutdowns on kids, young adults, we will not fully know the impacts of that for some time to come. But in my family, just speaking personally, it was brutal for my middle schooler. It was brutal for my high schooler. It was a very, very difficult time. When we talk about access to mental health, we're not just talking about the mentally ill that are on fentanyl and are struggling and have slid into a place they hadn't expected. We're talking about friends and family and kids and the people that are just struggling. And what we face right now in our state is this issue that is solvable. We have to improve reimbursement rates. We have to make it easier to be licensed in Oregon, to come to Oregon, to provide services in Oregon. We have too high of barriers. We have too high of walls and not enough incentives for people that are willing to do this work to actually be able to earn a living to do this work. And so it's a little bit ironic to me to constantly hear my opponents on the stage just be obliterated by how horrible Oregon is on this and that and the other. We're 50th on this, and we've got to work on that. They've had all the levers of government at their hands. They've been in charge. We got here because of their choices. There are not 2 other people in the state with more power than them besides the governor herself and maybe the Senate president. This is it. And they're looking around saying everything's broken. We got to fix it. If they could have fixed it, if they would have known how to fix it, they would have done it. We are here because of them. We need change.
Thank you. So now we move to Laura Gunderson of the Oregonian Oregon Live. And your order will be Senator Johnson, Representative Drazen, and Speaker Kotek.
Thank you. Senator Johnson? Do you fully support Oregon's current laws on abortion, which leave it essentially unrestricted in the state? If not, what specific restrictions would you support as governor? And what will you do as governor to address the expected increase in out-of-staters seeking abortions here? Do you support spending the public's money to help them?
Wow, that's a loaded question. I believe, lots of issues within it. I believe that Tina and I are in agreement. We voted for the bills that made Oregon's policy to be a pro-choice state. I am unapologetically pro-choice. I have been. I was on a Planned Parenthood board in Oregon before Tina came to Oregon, and so my record on choice is deep and long. Ms. Drazen, on the other hand, is anti-choice, and I don't believe that for the first time in 40 years, the state is going to elect an anti-choice governor. I simply think that her views are so out of sync with where Oregonians are right now, given the preponderance of Oregonians that support a woman's right to choose. And so, without hesitation, I would be a pro-choice governor and stand by the policies that are in place for the state of Oregon. As to your question about funding, I believe that Oregon tax money ought to be used to support Oregonians. Planned Parenthood has had a long tradition of being able to find sufficient funds to support others, so I believe Oregon tax money ought to be spent on Oregonians. That's not to say that you turn away a pregnant child or young person from Idaho. Planned Parenthood has sufficient resources to be able to do that without spending Oregon tax money.
Representative Drazen.
I have never shied away from my pro-life values. I haven't. But you can't really have it both ways. So the folks on the stage with me today are saying 2 things. That a woman's right to choose is protected in Oregon, that it's in Oregon statute, and they're the ones that put it there. And they're also saying that a woman's right to choose is potentially at risk in Oregon if you elect a pro-life governor. Both of those things cannot be true without legislative action. Can't be. So, as I have stated previously, I will be a governor that follows the law. I will not bypass Oregon's laws. I will actually enforce them uniformly, whether people in Portland like it or not. And at the same time, I am not hiding from my own values. Oregon's approach to this issue is unique. We are one of just a small handful of states that allow elective abortion up to birth. That's not what Roe v. Wade anticipated. That's not how most states have regulated this right, this point of access. That's Oregon. Oregon has some of the most extreme laws on the books related to this issue, and I don't think I'm at all out of line with Oregonians on this. Most Oregonians do not believe that taking a life in the third trimester, when if that baby were born otherwise, it would be viewed as preterm, that is somehow a woman's right. That's not accurate for Oregonians' views on this issue. And so I am a pro-life woman. This issue is in Oregon statute, and I have been very clear that I will abide by the law.
Thank you. Speaker Kotek.
Abortion is health care, and abortion is legal in Oregon, and we have made sure to provide in statute the strongest protections in the country for access to reproductive health care. Oregonians believe in the right to privacy. They believe government should stay out of these decisions. This is a critical moment in our nation's history. Although we thought it was coming, I think when Roe v. Wade was overturned by the Supreme Court, it was a wake-up call that what is happening nationally can impact our lives here unless we have a governor who will be that defense to any changes. Now, I hear what people are saying, well, we have it, what's the issue? As someone who knows how state government has to work, things come up. Will you promote access to services? As a governor, you can be proactive or you can be a barrier. When the legislature passed a $15 million package to help serve not only Oregon women, particularly in Eastern Oregon, who are getting their health care services in Idaho, but other women who might have to come here. That idea of saying, well, I just want our money to go to Oregonians, we're in too big of a moment in our country to say no to women who need access to care. And I'm the only person in this race who is a champion on this issue, who has believed in access to health care, and that is what abortion is, and that is why I'm backed by Planned Parenthood and Pro-Choice Oregon. This is not a moment for halvesies. This is about being firm on what this means for Oregonians and the rest of the country.
Thank you. So we move on to Andrew Cutler of the East Oregonian and LeGrand Observer. And Andrew, you will start off with Representative Drazen, and then Speaker Kotek, then Senator Johnson.
Okay. Representative, if elected governor, what steps would you take to improve gun safety in Oregon, including the limitation of the types of weapons that can be sold and who can purchase them?
I do not support additional restrictions on gun ownership in Oregon right now. Here's the reason. I believe that the Second Amendment is a constitutional right. And Oregon's current laws on the books in this particular category are doing a good job of safeguarding safety in our state right now. We have universal background checks. We have a red flag law that was passed before I went into the legislature, as I understand it, that actually allows people who live in the same home with someone to be able to identify them to law enforcement and say they're a risk to themselves or someone else. We have safeguards in Oregon. What we don't need in Oregon is this idea that, say, IP17, for example, just as an example of a measure that, as I understand it, is qualified for the ballot. That assumes that getting a permit is necessary for you to exercise your Second Amendment rights. So I think of our other constitutional rights. Can you even imagine if somebody wanted to go and protest and you had to sign up and there was a listing of who was going to participate in a protest? Because what if they rioted? What if they threw a brick at a window? What if at the end of that protest they committed a crime? Can you imagine if you had to get a list and sign up if you want to go to church? Your synagogue, your temple, your church. What if they approach our other rights in the same way that they're talking about approaching our Second Amendment rights? We need to recognize this is a critical issue. I care about keeping people safe, but we cannot abandon our concepts of what our freedoms mean.
Thank you. Speaker Kotek.
I think one of the priority for a governor is to keep people safe and to keep Oregonians safe. And I believe in common sense gun safety legislation. I've supported it my entire time in the legislature, and as Speaker made sure we got important things done. My opponents have voted or are not in favor of those things. I bet they would have voted no if they had been there, and then when the ones who were there did vote no. That was background checks, that was red flag laws, that was safe storage requirements. Things that we know work. I support IP 17 because in other states it has worked to reduce gun violence. But it's not enough just to talk about gun safety as it relates to these types of things. We have too many guns out there where people are getting them and hurting people and hurting themselves. We have to be proactive. We have to make sure when people are involved in gun violence or considering suicide by a firearm, we are providing resources. So it's a complicated issue. But when it comes to gun safety legislation and common sense, evidence-based approaches to reduce violence, I'm going to be there every time because it works. And the role of the governor is to make sure people are safe.
I am a responsible gun owner and collector. I have supported the Second Amendment right straight along. You have just heard from my opponents. Representative Drazen doesn't want to do anything. Tina wants to take your guns. I believe that what we need to do is to not torture law-abiding citizens by taking away their guns. We need to keep guns out of the wrong hands, and I have proposed two things that I think would go a long ways to do that. Raise the age from 18 to 21 on the purchase of certain weapons, and then to have really aggressive background checks. And by aggressive background checks, I mean incorporating records from schools. I would give schools immunity if they're providing data that says that little Johnny was killing cats or was writing dark emails. That needs to become part of the permanent record that would go into a background check. I believe we need to put many more mental health professionals into our schools, school resource officers, harden schools commensurate with community standards and what local parents, classroom teachers, and school boards want and need, and the state should help pay for that. This is not a question of taking people's guns away, as Speaker Kotek wants to do. This is a question of keeping the guns out of the wrong hands. I believe that because I have the confidence of gun owners, responsible gun owners, that I am exactly the person to broker the conversation that would bring us to even more practical solutions. But you can't do it to the rest of Oregon. You've got to do it with the rest of Oregon. I think IP 17 is a prescription to divide this state even further than we are. This is what's wrong with the partisan politics where it's either my way or the highway.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have to respond
Okay,
to that.
30 seconds.
I'm not interested in taking people's guns away, and it's really unfortunate and frustrating to have the politicization of an issue that's very important to people right now. After Buffalo and Uvalde, people are worried. People are scared. They want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to support responsible gun ownership and keep people safe in public spaces. And that is the role of government, to work with people to figure out strategies to do that. And it's nice to hear that, you know, background checks are a good thing now, but my opponent voted twice against background checks, including people coming out of the state hospital who shouldn't have a gun. So
Okay.
that's the truth.
Thank you.
And I'm going to jump in
Representative
too.
Drazen.
Yeah, thank you. Just to be clear, it's the role of government actually to safeguard our rights and to operate within our Constitution. And while in our everyday life there is nothing that we can do to bubble wrap any of us, we have to do our best to balance what are, in fact, our rights with the reality that some people in this world are bad people. There are criminals in the world. You know what you need to do when that occurs? Hire more law enforcement. Have safer communities. When you call, you want a police officer to come. In the rural parts of the state, when you call, it's a long wait. Even in Portland now, it's
Thank
a
you.
long wait.
Thank you. Senator Johnson, you could have 30 more seconds.
I guess this whole discussion is part and parcel of a farther left agenda that wants to release criminals and criminalize the police. I think we need much stronger presence of law enforcement. I think that it is regrettable that during the last riots in Portland that Tina wrote a letter chastising to Mayor Wheeler, chastising the police, and then some of her staff participated in the Antifa riots. This needs to be about accountability. It needs to be about finding practical solutions. It needs to be about
Thank you.
bringing Oregonians together.
Thank you, Senator
It needs
Johnson.
to be about honest with the facts, Senator Johnson.
Okay. So Mark Miller of Pampa Media Group gets the final question here. And your order is Speaker Kotek, Senator Johnson, and Representative Drazen.
Speaker Kotek, high tech has become a critical part of Oregon's economic base over the past decades, both in traditionally so-called white-collar communities like Washington County and increasingly in places like central and southern Oregon. Many Oregonians were surprised to hear earlier this year that Intel Corporation, our state's largest private employer, is actually opening its next major campus not in Oregon but in Ohio. That means Oregon's missing out on thousands of jobs and millions in tax revenue. To put it bluntly, what happened and what can Oregon do to be more competitive in attracting investments like this Intel plant or other high-tech enterprises or other business sectors?
Thank you, Mark. And high tech is a very important industry for the future, the current and the future economic growth of our state. And I think it's really important that the next governor make sure that we do everything we can to expand the high tech industries to all parts of our state. And what's a critical part of that is making sure we have full broadband access around the state. I think that's going to be important in building the workforce in other parts of the state, not just in Washington County. As it relates to Intel, Intel's committed to Oregon. They have talked about their research facility. I don't know what happened there because I'm not the governor. But what I would say is, as governor, I would have that personal relationship with the CEO at Intel and have that conversation and make sure that we can keep jobs here. Our high-tech industry outside, including Intel, is very important to the state. And we have to make sure that our education program is helping train people for those jobs, make sure that we maintain appropriate levels of incentives to help people stay here. And Oregon makes things. I want to make more things here. Manufacturing is key, and high-tech manufacturing is a double good for us, and it is about the future of our state. And I will work with Intel and any other employer who wants to figure out how to stay here and grow here. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Senator Johnson?
I actually do know the answer to the question because I talked with Intel executives. And the answer was, answer the damn phone. Nobody in the governor's office saw the warning signals or reached out to Intel when the tallest tree in our Silicon Forest is headed out the door to Ohio. There were plenty of warning signs. And because Kate Brown has not been tuned into economic development, allowed Intel's needs to go unheard. Nobody asked the customer, what do you need? And what they needed was a little bit of expansion land for industrial expansion around this huge investment that they have made outside of Hillsborough. I would be a governor bent on economic development, having the phone numbers of the CEOs of our major corporations on speed dial, reaching out to them constantly saying, what can the state of Oregon do to partner better with you to anticipate your needs? Intel is our largest employer, and I believe they took part of their portfolio to Ohio out of benign neglect by the Oregon governor. That never should have happened.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. Representative Drazen?
Yeah, this was shocking news when it happened, and there was a lot of finger pointing after the fact. But can you blame them? We have one of the worst regulatory and tax environments in the nation for businesses in Oregon, and Intel made this decision, and Ohio said, listen, we want to be supportive of national security. We're going to find the land for you. We're going to work for you, and they built that relationship. That didn't happen in Oregon. That is now in the past. So the larger question becomes, how do we keep the next Intel from moving? How do we continue to keep and grow the industries and the sectors that are here? Maybe they're smaller. Maybe they want to expand. Maybe they're looking across the border and considering expansion in other states today already. We need to recognize that Oregon is stronger when our business sector can, in fact, grow here. We'll have more jobs, we'll have higher paying jobs, and we will have the kind of economy that will support our next generation of Oregonians. We don't want anybody to leave. We want people to stay here and grow here. But our business environment, our regulatory environment, our taxation environment indicates that Oregon government expects to do everything for all people, and somebody's going to pay the bill. And it's eventually Oregonians themselves, but the middleman is always business.
Thank you. So that actually ends the portion of the debate for the panelist questions, and we're going to move to a different format now, where we're going to allow the candidates to ask each other questions, and to keep things somewhat organized, we had a drawing ahead of time to determine who was going to ask another candidate a question. So just to remind everybody what that drawing produced, Senator Johnson gets to ask a question of Speaker Kotek. Representative Drazen gets to ask a question of Senator Johnson, and then Speaker Kotek gets to ask a question of Representative Drazen. So we'll start. Senator Johnson, if you would like to ask Tina Kotek a question.
Sure. Tina, without saying the phrase 10-year plan or 5-year plan, what would you do in the first year of getting elected governor to end tent cities, and why hasn't it happened already? Why haven't you done it already?
Thank you for the question. Ending our homelessness crisis is an absolute priority for me. So where we have to start on day one is making sure we have the workforce we need to bring more people onto the streets and special outreach teams to work with individuals to build those relationships, to get them into shelter and then to permanency. That means more shelters. That means continuing the work the legislature's been doing to fund navigation centers and shelters, streamline the siting of those places in communities around the state. Every community, not just Portland, has to do their part so people can stay in the communities where they started, so they have more social capital and can more quickly get back into permanency and into permanent housing. It means more mental health and addiction treatment services for folks who are on the streets right now. There is a lot going wrong, and if you're living on the streets, you're probably ending up further traumatized and having further challenges. So making sure we have those services. We've already talked about mental health and addiction and how we have to make sure the money that's in the system can actually get out there. I would say what's going wrong in Portland is the adults aren't talking to each other, and we need to do that better, because I've worked hard to get shelters funded and build new shelters and make sure people can move from tents to shelters to permanency and get the services they need, and we need more of that. And that's a day one priority for me, and I have the relationships and, frankly, the decisive leadership to make that happen, and I look forward to having that opportunity to do that.
Thank you. Representative Drazen, you get to ask a question now of Senator Johnson.
Thank you. Senator Johnson, you voted for the corporate activities tax, the commercial activities tax. Since that time, you have been very public about the fact that you regret that vote, that you wish you hadn't taken that vote. What I would like to know is, did you not know at that moment to vote no? Why did you vote yes?
It's not evil that the state raises and spends revenue. What's evil is that we have not held government accountable. I don't think that the legislature has demanded accountability in our investment in the Student Success Act. I want government to work. It needs to show up when people need it. Otherwise, how do we build bridges? How do we fund schools? How do we pay for public safety? The corporate activity tax was debated behind closed doors in a building where public policy was occurring without the public being present. I believe it was rushed. I don't believe there was adequate opportunity for debate. There were promises of significant PERS reform that accompanied the corporate activity tax. We ended up with too little PERS reform and too much corporate activity tax. We were also being told repeatedly by business that they needed, by education, that we needed to produce an educated workforce. Business wanted that. There was all kinds of debate about that bill. In the end, my belief that we needed to have more money in education was substantiated by my vote. I believe that the corporate activity tax needs to be reviewed and mitigated. Its compounding effect is too big a burden on business right now in Oregon, and I have heard that everywhere I go. As governor, I would work to modify the punitive effects of the corporate activity tax and certainly build in benchmarks and accountability to accompany the spending on the education side of that ledger.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. Speaker Kotek, you have the opportunity to ask a question of Representative Drazen.
Thank you. Christine, you've been asked many, many times about the 2020 election, and each time you've pivoted when asked. You've never directly answered the question. As far as I know, you have never publicly said that Donald Trump lost the presidency in the national election, not just in Oregon, but nationally. So will you say today that the results of the national election in 2020 were legitimate and that Donald Trump lost?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I didn't realize there was so much confusion in your mind on this one, so let me clarify. I continue to focus on Oregon, so my questions to almost every question, I try to bring it back to Oregon, try to focus on this state. I'm running for governor. I'm not running for Congress. I'm not running for any federal level of office. So that is why I continually come back to that issue. And I do stand with Oregonians who want to ensure that we don't have fraud in any category in government, from employment department checks all the way through to our elections. So that is important to me, so it's an opportunity to address that issue. But as it relates to the 2020 election, there has never been an issue for that with me. Donald Trump did not win. Joe Biden did. He is our president.
Thank you. Thank you for those questions and those answers. We now are going to move to closing remarks. And again, based on the drawing before the debate, the order of closing remarks, and you have 3 minutes for closing remarks. The order is Speaker Kotek, Representative Drazen, and Senator Johnson. So, Speaker Kotek.
Thank you, Mark. I really want to thank everyone for the opportunity to be here today to discuss ideas and to speak directly to voters. I love Oregon and all its potential. I moved here in 1987. I was 21 years old. I took a train from the East Coast with a suitcase and a steamer trunk and ended up in Eugene. And I fell in love with this state. It was November. It was rainy. I went to the coast with some friends. We went to Yachats, and I fell in love with the coast. And then that Thanksgiving, I drove all the way to the other end of the state, to Ontario, to celebrate Thanksgiving. And I will never forget that first drive over the mountains and the drive through the high desert with the frost glistening off the sides of the road. Fell in love with this place. And it's a state where everyone can be who they want to be. It's a place where I could be my authentic self. I did end up going back to school, finished up at the University of Oregon, and I never looked back. Because this is a state of possibility, that's why I'm running for governor. I believe in the possibility of Oregon and what it can be for everybody who lives here. And that's why I'm in public service. I want to make things better. I want us to achieve that vision we have of our state where everyone can be successful in every corner of the state, no matter who they are. It's what I did when I worked at Oregon Food Bank and Children First for Oregon, when I served in the legislature, trying to make things better and solve issues so we can all have the type of life we want to have. And right now we're at a crossroads. I talked to a lot of people in this election and I listened to what's going on in their lives. And they're concerned about their future, they're concerned about their families, their children. And what I hear is Oregonians want government to work better. They want things to be better, they want things to get fixed. And if you hire me as your governor, I'm not going to spend time playing partisan games or playing games at all. My job is to fight for every Oregonian to get the work done to take on our toughest challenges, because the challenges are real. They are tough. They are serious. We've talked about them today. And as your next governor, I'm going to fight every day to end our housing and homelessness crisis, to provide mental health and addiction treatment services for every Oregonian in every corner of the state, to make sure every child in the state has a good public education, and to take on climate change, not only to protect our communities who are already impacted by climate change, but to build a cleaner energy future where every part of the state benefits from that change. Because being able to deliver results right now is what really matters for Oregonians. There are 3 of us up here today. All of us have worked in the legislature. There's not a newbie up here. But I am sure that I know how to work with people and solve problems because I have the track record to show that. I'm dedicated to working for all Oregonians. We love this state. Let's work together to make it better. And I would be so honored to have your vote as your next governor.
Thank you, Speaker Kotek. Representative Drazen.
Thank you. This election comes down to one very basic idea. Do we want more of the same, or do we want change? Tina Kotek and Kate Brown have worked closely together for Tina's entire term. There is no separation there, because they don't want there to be any separation. They are aligned. They're aligned philosophically, and they're aligned in their leadership decisions and their actions. Where we are today is a direct result of the leaders that are on this stage in the Democrat Party. The thing that I continually am surprised by and privately disappointed by is the decision of Senator Johnson, now that she's no longer a Democrat, to talk about uniting people, but doing it in a way that is perpetually divisive. I'm tired of having someone yell at me. I'm tired of it. I do not want to have another leader be condescending and divisive. It's been going on for far too long. And Senator Johnson, while she'll look at you and say, I'm going to bring the best ideas together for both parties, in the next breath, she'll remind you why you hate those parties. Because that is how she's playing this game. She's been a Democrat for 20 years with a gavel and in charge. And now it's expedient and convenient to shed that skin and take on a new one and erase her own history and rewrite her own vote record, rewrite her own service to pursue additional power. That is nothing to be proud of. The stakes could not be higher in this election cycle. I want a better future for Oregon. I want a better future for my kids. I want to stay here. I want people to stay here. Like Tina, I love Oregon. I can understand why she looked around and said, this is my place. Oregon embraces everybody. I embrace everybody. I respect people regardless of their differences of opinion. I've always had a professional and respectful relationship with Speaker Kotek. That is important to me. I respect people no matter what, but I can tell you I'm a little tired of being disrespected for the benefit of a political agenda. And that's happening way too much on this stage. I'm disappointed by it, I'm surprised by it, and it's not good enough for Oregonians. We have got to choose change. Homelessness will not change under these two ladies. Crime will not improve. Our schools will not improve. We need real leadership and real change to hold the Democrats to account. Not just shed your skin, change your title, and do more of the same. I'm asking Oregonians to vote for change this year. I'm asking for them to vote for me for governor of our state. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Drazen. Senator Johnson.
Wow, talk about divisive. I appreciate the opportunity to appear here today. I, too, have been disappointed. When Christine and I talked periodically during the 21 session, she was always pleased to see that I was poking at the Democrats. And now suddenly her ads have changed substantially. I would reciprocate by saying, apparently ambition overcame integrity. But in my closing statement, I want to say Oregon's next governor has a long to-do list. We've touched on many of those items today, but she's not going to get very far beholden to the same narrow set of interests on either side of the political spectrum. Simply trading one set of extremes for another is no change at all. In fact, I think it's going to make things worse. We need a governor who isn't owned by the public sector unions or Oregon's right to life. We need a governor who's loyal only to the people of Oregon, regardless of party. A governor who will demand bipartisan support for legislation, budgets, and appointments to boards and commissions so that all Oregonians, not just a single political party, will have a seat at the table. A governor who will lead with straight talk and common sense and tell it like it is. Running independent of the two parties isn't the easy road, but I believe it's the right road at the right time for Oregonians. As you've heard today, we're certainly going to hear before the next election day, to Tina, I'm too conservative, and to Christine, I'm too liberal. To tell you the truth, most Oregonians can be found in between those two extremes. I believe, like Goldilocks, Oregonians will find an independent governor just right for their tastes. So you don't have to leave any political party or join a party to support me. You just have to want a better Oregon. So I don't care if you voted for Biden or Trump or wrote in your dog. I want you to join me in forging a better future for the state that we all love. As the world seems to be coming apart at the seams, we have a chance here in Oregon to come together around shared values and a shared vision for a state that is uniquely beautiful and independent of spirit. I want to recapture that maverick spirit and get us back on track. At my age and with my background, I may seem like an improbable leader to shake up a broken system, an imperfect agent of big, bold change, but that's exactly who I am and that's exactly what I am. And I hope you will consider me today in helping to rescue a state we all love. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. I want to thank all the candidates for being here, all three of the candidates. Let's give them a round of applause. Let's say thanks to our journalists on the panel. And to the OMPA for sponsoring the debate. And I also want to say thanks once again to our partner, Allied Video Productions, for making the live stream possible. So thanks again.